Let's get you set for Super Bowl 60 right now on Fantasy Football Today Express. Aizer, Jamey Eisenberg, getting you all set for the big game, Seattle and New England. All right, Jamey, we're going to talk DFS here. Have you created any new lineups since we last spoke?
I have not. I have 10 lineups that you can actually read on the site on CBSSports.com, 5 on DraftKings, 5 on FanDuel.
Okay, pretty cool. Do you have a favorite?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I tried to do like a Seattle slated lineup for each site, a New England slated lineup for each slanted lineup for each site, and I guess slate is the wrong word to use when we're talking about slate. And then some mixed, just to kind of switch it up a little bit, but tried to get at least, some sampling of almost all the key players. I didn't really change up a lot of the captain / MVPs. I used a lot of the same guys for those spots, but mixed up the other stuff a little bit.
So what is your strategy with the captain / MVP? Because they're getting 1.5 times as many points as everyone else in your lineup.
Excuse me, I cough. I think for that spot, I want to try to maximize the points, obviously, so you mentioned earlier today on our full length episode, like you have Hunter Henry in the MVPs in your MVP or captain spot. I forget which one you said. That makes sense to be different. Obviously if he has a big game, then you're going to be thrilled about that. I think he said he's going to use Jason Myers, right? Because he's expecting a lot of field goals.
Yeah.
So you want to be different if you can. But I think you also want to have the person who's going to score the most points there too. So there's different ways to go about it. I think there's certain strategies, like you can just put the 4 best players, use that for your salary, and then just throw 2 cheap guys and then aren't going to do anything and just hope you can maximize it that way. But there's just always different ways when it comes to the showdown lineup to sort of maximize that. If you go cheaper though, on DraftKings, you get more options because the pricing changes.
Who do you think is going to score the most fantasy points?
Usually it's going to be the quarterbacks, so you lean that way if you trust the quarterbacks. But I can't see Sam Darnold having a big game without JSN having a big game. So, he's obviously somebody that's going to be in play for a 20-point PPR type of game, a 30 PPR type of game. He has just that much upside. He had 10 games this season with at least 10 targets, including the playoffs, and he averaged 25.1 PPR points per game in those 10.
Wow. It's a tough matchup for him, and JSN's only faced 3 defenses that are currently, finished top 10 against wide receivers. He had 1 great game, 1 fine game, and 1 bad game. But he seems pretty matchup proof. They did use Christian Gonzalez to shadow Cortland Sutton for the most part 2 weeks ago, their most recent game. Do you think that's going to happen? You think he's going to shadow JSN?
If it's me and it's the biggest game of the season and that's the most important player on the other side of the ball, I'm putting my best guy on him. Look, Cooper Kupp's had, a couple of decent games, obviously had a couple of good games, a few good games throughout the course of the season. And he's been here before, former Super Bowl MVP. Rashid Shaheed is obviously their speed threat and is going to make plays. But this is the guy that makes this offense go in JSN. And so I'm putting Christian Gonzalez on him. I'm putting a safety over the top. I'm probably putting a linebacker underneath. I'm going to make things as difficult for JSN as possible. That being said, I don't know how you stop him because he's that good. But I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make that happen.
Let's talk about the players in this game that actually get targets, and we'll talk about the running backs in a bit. But, Cooper Kupp gets targets, although he has had his consecutive games with double-digit fantasy points for the first time since, I think October.
Twice all season, Sam. Yep.
Yeah, so Cooper Kupp with 11 targets in his last 2 games. The last time that happened was weeks 5 and 6. 3 touchdowns this season for Kupp, including the postseason. Rashid Shaheed almost never gets targeted. You're talking 2 or 3 a game, basically, for Rashid Shaheed.
He has yet to score an offensive touchdown with the Seahawks.
Jake Bobo, it's a complete dart throw and a prayer. Demario Douglas, same thing. But Kayshon Boutte and obviously Stephon Diggs gets targets. Kayshon Boutte and Matt Collins get targets. Hunter Henry gets targets. Now, are all 4 Diggs, Henry, and those 2 wide receivers going to get targets in the same game? No, not necessarily. But And Austin Hooper, very rarely. You're usually not going to see more than 2 targets in a game for Hooper.
And AJ Barner has been non-existent in the playoffs.
He has been, but at least he did have a stretch. He ended the season with 3 or more catches in 6 of his last 8 games, 5.7 or more PPR fantasy points in 6 of his last 8 games. At least he had that. But you're right, he has pretty much disappeared in the 2 postseason games. So that's just some stats there for you, just to let you know who's actually getting targets. Jamie and I will talk about the running backs. Potentially 2 featured back. Definitely going to have 1 feature back in this game. Ramondre could be the other based on what happened in the Denver game, but 2 of the best run defenses in football. What does it mean for your DFS lineups when we come back? All right, so look, you got to pay up a little bit here for Ramondre and for Ken Walker. Who do you like better?
I mean, I lean Ken Walker just because I think he's more explosive, and there's, I think, less likely a chance that George Holani steals work from him than there is Trevion Henderson. Like, you could see the Patriots like 5 or 6 design plays for Trevion Henderson to get him out in space and see if he can make an explosive play. And I know Holani had some plays in the passing game against the Rams, and that will certainly show up. I think, again, you brought it up in terms of props, that 1.5 receptions, that seems like an easy over to play, even though the odds aren't great. But I just think that Ken Walker has small sample size, but 3 games this season where Zach Charbonnet was either out or did not play the majority of the game, and it's 18 PPR points or more. Like, that's hard to overlook. The role in the passing game is hard to overlook when Charbonnet is not on the field. And really the touchdowns, 6 touchdowns combined in those 3 games. So he had a 2 touchdown game in week 3 against New Orleans. He had a 3 touchdown game against the 49ers. And then he had the 1 touchdown last week against the Rams. Like, that's the biggest thing I think that changes for him, is he doesn't come off the field in any short yardage situations, especially near the goal line. So I would lean Walker, but I also think that as good as Seattle's run defense is, when Milton Williams is on the field, the Patriots run defense is almost elite. Like, what they've done first 11 games of the season when he was healthy and active, and I know Spillane in and out, wherever you want to take around it, but just Milton Williams alone, 2 touchdowns to running backs in the first 11 games. In the last 4 games since he's been back, week 18 in the 3 playoff games, no rushing touchdowns, no touchdowns to running backs. Like, they're averaging almost 2 yards per carry. It's pretty dominant. And
a running back hasn't had a run longer than 10 yards in those 4 games.
Yeah, and again, they face Houston. That's not a great running team. They face Denver with a backup quarterback. Obviously,
they faced the Chargers without Omarion Hampton. Hampton got hurt right away.
And offensive line issues. So a lot of what New England's numbers are very weighted because of who they've played. And not to take anything away from them, they're here, but a lot of it is because of this quarterback missing, that coach was fired, this team was missing that team was missing this, so they've sort of, worked their way productively and successfully to this spot. And again, not to take anything away from them, but we'll see if this is another one of those games. And again, we're not talking about an elite offense by any stretch. Certainly Seattle's performance has been great, and they've turned things up lately, going back to basically that overtime win against the Rams. Sam Darnold has looked much better. Obviously, Walker has started to perform better, and JSN's elite, but we're still not talking about, greatest show on turf type offense. This is still a very, I think, slightly above average offense at best.
All right, so we'll just finish it with this. Who are some guys that you feel like are must-haves in a fantasy lineup, or maybe just the best bargain, something like that? Recommendations.
Well, I think, the high-end guys are kind of obvious. You should be looking at some combination of Drake May, Sam Darnold, JSN, and the 2 running backs. I think those are the safest plays. Then you sort of go to that next tier of guys, and it's Diggs, maybe Hunter Henry, maybe Cooper Kupp, but that's not a very deep group. I think it's really that next group of guys, like, who you're trying to get that's the cheaper options or can sort of backfill and maybe still have some production. So as I said on the show earlier today, like, I have a lot of Jake Bobo just because he's cheap. And if he catches a pass, it may be a red zone pass. It may be a touchdown. Again, he hasn't done very much. He's got 4 catches on the season, but 2 of them come in the last 2 playoff games. I think you're looking at Rashid Shaheed, because if there is a splash play that can get a broken tackle or something, that's the type of player that can, be a difference maker and swing a matchup for you. So he's cheap enough also. You brought up a great scenario about, Tariq Woolen and what he allows or has allowed and what that could mean for Kayshon Boutte. I think, you listened to the show earlier today, Mac Hollins. So Mac Hollins comes back last week against the Broncos after a 4-game absence with an abdomen injury where they placed him on IR, and he gets 2 catches for 51 yards. Well, the 2 previous games that he played before getting hurt, He had 17 combined targets in those 2 games. One of those, he had 13.5 or 13.9 PPR points. He had 6 games this season with at least 5 targets. And in 3 of them, he's been 13.9 PPR points or more. So, there are guys that are going to show up here. It's just not one of these off. It's not like the Rams where, the 2 receivers were the only 2 players that caught passes against Seattle in their last game. That was it. I'm sorry, the only 2 receivers that caught passes. Tight ends were involved, but it wasn't like a very deep receiving core as we well know with the Rams. So this is like a wide open group. You mentioned Austin Hooper. It could be him. We could see Demario Douglas have a play, score a touchdown against the Texans. In the playoffs already. I think for Seattle, it could be AJ Barner, could be Jake Bobo, could be somebody that just hasn't been productive lately. Could be George Halani on a swing pass. Something along those lines. So there's just a lot of different ways you can go with this, which makes it fun and your lineups could be diverse, but it also could not necessarily lend itself to, okay, at least you know what you're getting. It's a lot of guessing.
Yeah. I just think one of the questions that people are going to have to answer is you've got Walker for sure, and it's probably Stevenson having big roles. TreVeyon Henderson did have a shoulder injury going into the Broncos game. He ended up being a full participant by the end of the week, but was that the reason he played 4 snaps? That was weird. If TreVeyon gets back to playing a third of the snaps and Henderson's touches is 60% of what he had last week, then Henderson's probably going to be too expensive, Stevenson is probably going to be too expensive. But you just have to look at these running backs facing arguably the 2 best run defenses in the NFL and ask yourself, are they traps? They seem obvious because they're feature backs and that's always great. And they're both involved in the passing game, but they might have bad games. There's only been, when Milton Williams has played, there's only been 2 running backs who scored more than 13.5 PPR fantasy points all year against the Patriots when Milton Williams has been in the lineup. So, it's a question you have to answer. I think there's certainly pros and cons to playing both of the running backs, but I have a lineup. I think I only have 2 lineups. One of them has neither. One of them has just Ramondre Stevenson. But could see.
I think that's
too good.
The one thing for this, we didn't see it from Stevenson in the Denver game, but he's been 3 of his last 5, I think it was, 3 of his last 6, 3 or more catches. And then what Walker has done in the last 2 games with his receptions, I think 7 catches in those 2 games. So we are seeing these guys involved in the passing game, and I think that's where they're going to have to win. They're not going to do it by big games on the ground, at least the expectation based on the matchups and who they're facing. So, Stevenson, 25 carries against the Broncos, 71 yards. Like, that's not going to cut it if you're talking about using him.
Do you have one lineup handy?
Sure.
All right, give me one lineup.
Which site?
I do not care. You give me one site, I'll give you the other.
Okay, I'll give you on FanDuel with... Sorry, the way they put on the story is not great. I'll give you a Seattle slanted lineup on FanDuel. So Sam Darnold MVP, JSN flex, Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed, AJ Barner, and the other side would be Stephon Diggs.
Okay, on DraftKings, I went Hunter Henry as the captain. We talked about it just on paper. Hunter Henry probably has the best matchup of any player in this game. Hunter Henry with JSN, Drake May, Mac Hollins, Ramondre Stevenson, and the Seahawks DST. Seems a little contradictory, but like we've seen, Drake May can have a good game and maybe fumble the ball, get sacked a few times, been sacked 15 times in the playoffs. So you can have the Seahawks DST get some turnovers. Drake make himself a good game. I think it's going to be kind of a low scoring game. So, the DSTs might be valuable too. And the kickers, don't forget about the kickers. All right, Jamie, thank you very much. Enjoy the Super Bowl.
You too. Everybody listening as well.
By the way, I went to the sandwich shop that I told you about today. Mm-hmm. They are getting evicted, so I will not have any sandwiches from that place.
Evicted?
They weren't picking up their phone all week, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to drive over there and see what's going on. Smash eviction notice right on the door.
Damn.
All right, we'll have to pivot. Have a good Super Bowl, everybody. See ya.